Representative Matt Gaetz grilled FBI Director Christopher Wray during a House Judiciary meeting on the Hill today. Let's watch some of that.
But I have other questions. I'm sitting here with my father. I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, Director?
I'm not going to get into commenting on that.
You seem deeply uncurious about it, don't you? Almost suspiciously uncurious. Are you protecting the Bidens?
Absolutely not. The FBI does not and has no interest in
You won't answer the question about whether or not
politically.
that's a shakedown, and everybody knows why you won't answer it. Because to the millions of people who will see this, they know it is. And your inability to acknowledge that is deeply revealing about you. But
That's interesting, asking him to respond at very least to the optics of it. You know, I would expect, given this at least on its face, bad optics of it, that he would say, well, I agree that that was suspicious and a suspicious exchange. We looked into it and didn't see any evidence of wrongdoing. That's the more of the kind of response I would expect. And I do think, at least from a rhetorical
I'm not touching it, sorry.
Yeah, and then he got defensive about the accusation that the FBI was biased, but that even is a deflection from the core issue here that Gaetz is raising, which is, did you actually have any interest in investigating this moment, this
because
call?
That's what we're all wondering about. Because again, I've said this 1,000 times, I'll say it again, it's not really about, shouldn't be about, whether Hunter Biden had a drug addiction and misreported it on a gun purchasing form. It's about whether he used his last name to try, I mean, there's compelling evidence that he did in fact try to use his last name to do influence peddling, and then whether Joe Biden was part of that scheme unwittingly or wittingly. That's what people want to know. That's what they deserve to know. That speaks to the potential alleged corruption of this family. And the lack of curiosity about that, right? If he said you looked into it and it's not true or it's manipulated, or those were from the WhatsApp messages,
or Hunter
they're not
was
real.
trying to get his father involved, but his father was
Joe
not
said,
actually
"Listen here, Jack. No, sirree, Bob."
Yeah.
Fine, but it's no. We can't stop besmirching the reputation of law enforcement. How dare you?
Well, Wray also answered questions about his department's investigation into January 6th.
Memphis. How many individuals were either FBI employees or people that the FBI had made contact with were in the January 6th entry of the Capitol and surrounding area?
So I really need to be careful here talking about where we have or have not used confidential human sources.
Was there one or more? Was there one or more individuals that would fit that description on January 6th that were in or around the Capitol?
I believe there is a filing in one of the January 6 cases that can provide a little more information about this, and I'm happy to see if we can follow back up with you.
I just want an answer. Was there one or more? I mean, you would know if there was at least one individual who worked for the FBI who entered the Capitol on that day.
I can't, again, I just can't speak to that here, but I'm happy to get the court filing that.
Look, it's been 2 years, and you're now come before us. The gentleman asks these questions, makes all kinds of insinuations, and you nod your head yes, and then I ask you simply, was there one or more? And you won't answer that. So I'm going to make the assumption that there was more than one, more than 5, more than 10, and that you're ducking the question because you don't want to answer for the fact that you had at least one, and somehow missed understanding that some of the individuals were very dangerous and that there were others inciting individuals to enter the Capitol after others broke windows. So,
again, Wray seems to be missing the point in a way that is making himself seem guiltier, or the FBI seem guiltier than they may or may not be. The
well,
problem,
they're just guilty.
Well, the problem isn't necessarily the presence of, like, in a world where we like the FBI and we think they serve a good police function, and there was intelligence about there being some fracas at the inauguration, and that you need to make sure that nothing bad happens to the president and democracy. Okay, FBI people in the crowd monitoring the situation isn't what's so nefarious. What's nefarious is the idea that it's the FBI plants that are instigating the riot and the illegal behavior that has now become such a polarizing issue. So, you know, choosing to pick your battle and look like you're prevaricating over whether or not there is even an FBI agent there, right, is not the battle you should be fighting. What you should be fighting is the conversation over whether or not they behaved wrongly, right, and this was a false flag or whatever.
Right. It's certainly not plausible that Christopher Wray would not know how many undercover agents roughly
or that there was even
involved.
One.
Right.
No?
He should know. If he genuinely doesn't know, that itself is a huge indictment of the FBI, what they're losing track, the same way the Pentagon is losing billions of dollars in Ukraine and elsewhere, they're just like losing track of their assets. I mean, that's not good, because some of the assets of the undercover people are not actually just in general in these situations. There's both like a genuine undercover agent, someone who works for federal law enforcement, and then there's assets. Then there are people who might very well be, you know, genuine members of a militia group or a terrorist group or something, but for whatever reason, because they're being blackmailed, because they're just financially seeking, because they've had a change of heart, variety of reasons, are cooperating with the FBI, or they're trying to avoid prosecution
like the Proud Boys leader who was the FBI informant, right? Enrique Tarrio?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so
all those people are FBI informants. You can't throw a rock at a Proud Boys gathering without hitting an FBI informant. So obviously he does know. He was trying not to say, and then yes, there are two reasons to be concerned about that. So many, you know, some Republicans saying that some conservatives are going to try to say that the people that did the illegal activity did so at the behest of those in the crowd who were among law enforcement. That's, you know, one theory. I don't know that that's really been borne out necessarily, but it could also just be, what was the purpose of those assets in law enforcement agencies embedded, if not to prevent this from happening, which they totally failed to do, either by, you know, reporting to their superiors that this is what's being organized, or by, you know, they go, okay, actually, I'm throwing off my disguise now, stop what you're doing, you're under arrest, to stop this from happening.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't work. Representative Darrell Issa, by the way, pressed Wray on the FBI's pressuring of social media companies on their content moderation decisions. Let's watch that as well.
On things like where COVID came from, where do you find the national security interest in that? Where do you find the interest in free speech of American citizens being taken down? And I repeat, free speech of American citizens. Where do you have that authority?
So we don't ask social media companies to censor information or suppress information when it comes to national security threats, certainly. So what we do is alert them when some other intelligence agency gives us information about a foreign intelligence service being behind some account. We will call social media companies' attention to that. But at the end of the day, we're very clear that it's up to the social media companies to decide whether to do something about it or not.
The suggestion of the most powerful law enforcement operation is not a suggestion. It is, in fact, effectively an order. Mr. Chairman,
So this was the issue RFK Jr. was getting at in that interview we discussed. I thought he had a good grasp of the situation. You know, at the end of the day, it is a subjective assessment whether or not the FBI or any other intelligence agency is passing on legitimate intel of risks that social media companies should be aware of versus illegitimate intelligence that is calculated to have some political outcome one way or the other. And to say, we were talking about this in the context of that injunction that specifically named RFK Jr., that says, you know, that these intelligence agencies can't do this. Well, it acknowledged that there is going to have to be some subjective sense of who draws the line between what is kind of a legitimate advice versus something that looks coercive, as it was described there, as an order.
Congress is going to have to do that, probably.
Well, Congress is the one that's the problem. I mean, like, this is like one of these...
Well, Congress is... I mean, no, these are rogue agencies, they're just... These are rogue agencies operating way beyond their authority. They're flagging lists of accounts that they've gotten from dubious disinformation experts. These are lists of people, supposedly Russian bots, actually genuine Americans. They've flagged joke tweets. They've flagged all sorts of things, even before getting into the, well, is this a foreign person behind it?
I mean,
question.
You've made this argument so many times, Robby, that the initial gloss in the Twitter files was, oh no, the FBI is being having all this influence, and it's very, very bad. And the people at Twitter are liberal patsies who are swallowing this all down like the idiots that they are.
No, I didn't say that. No,
I'm literally saying that you didn't say that. That was the initial gloss.
For sure.
However, you pointed out that that wasn't accurate and true. That, in fact, the people at Twitter were doing a lot of really good pushback. Their liberalism aside, they were able to push back and not actually implement the overwhelming majority of the requests that the FBI was giving to them, with some big and notable exceptions like the Hunter Biden laptop situation, right?
Right. And over time, the weight and the pressure, not just from law enforcement, but also because of the degree to which they were being shamed and attacked in the mainstream media for not doing this seriously, caused them to eventually begrudgingly throw up their hands.
So that's the thing. If it's the media pressure that's causing Twitter to make mistakes.
Obviously, there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of getting at here, where it's not that the concern isn't legitimate, that you can be under so much pressure from whatever source, including the government, which is kind of naturally coercive because of how much power it has, to do things that you shouldn't do. At what point are you expecting, at what point is the onus on the social media company to basically say, well, I have to resist, versus on these external actors to behave in these kind of subjective and narrowly circumscribed ways? I think that's a legitimately difficult question.
Well, sure, but it's just, we can't force the social media company to do things in a way that we might like better. We can't force the mainstream media to be fair or more discerning of threats. We can force government agencies to stop doing this. That's all we can do.
You could do something like, you've talked about this, you've brought this up before, that sometimes elected officials will threaten withholding Section 230 protections if they don't do X, Y, and Z. We recently were discussing a tweet from Michael Schellenberger that suggested that happen to companies that don't have sufficient transparency, et cetera. And we agreed that seemed like a bad idea, that you shouldn't, basically, the government should be in a position to say, I'm basically going to undermine your ability to operate as a company. It said
in this decision by Judge Doughty, it says, he claims, obviously, a higher court will see if the Supreme Court would agree with this. I suspect our current Supreme Court would agree with this. It says explicitly that using the threat of revoking Section 230 as a way to induce compliance with censorship is unconstitutional, violates the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So the implication of that is that threatening to take away Section 230 for doing in either direction, it's going to be the same problem.
People need to make
that speaks to what I'm saying, is that we can't force the social media companies to behave differently.
Yeah, I think that one way to make it less coercive is to create some guarantees for these companies with respect to Section 230 and to have some settled decisions here. Whether or not to provide an organization, a company with Section 230, should be dependent on factors separate and apart from these political considerations. I think it's fine to make an assessment about whether or not they're acting as a publisher versus acting as a neutral Section 230 organization. Those kind of conversations are more value neutral and are in line with how we generally treat the telephone company, Google, internet providers, and things like that. But making it on the basis of how you manage information is just so subjective that I don't want those threats to be levied in one way or the other. And it feels like we need to settle that issue, or else it's going to be continued to be a political ping pong.
I mean, again, I'm most interested in firing the people who work for Christopher Wray who sent these messages. I think that would send a message to whoever is it, or just have it be practiced in the way that the Hatch Act. Federal employees can't, engage in political activity on the dime of the there's some, law, something like that says, hey, if you're Rob Flaherty, you work for the Biden White House, and you send an email saying, why is this satire about, Biden's granddaughter still up? You lose your job or you pay a fine or something.
Do you think there's a such thing as a legitimate kind of security risk or, let's say, foreign interference that the FBI or any other intelligence agencies could legitimately want to flag for a social media company like this.
Theoretically,
child trafficking ring, something like that.
Theoretically, yes, but the vast majority has. But it's so.
Sure, but that's.
It has been used as a justification.
But that's the problem.
So many times.
As long as you believe that theoretically there is some good reason for an intelligence agency to reach out to a social media company, someone's going to have to be constantly policing the line between what a good reason is and what a bad reason is.
But the line needs to get. We've slid down the slippery slope way too much, and we have to have a default presumption now that there's been a default presumption that the government reaching out is in good faith and there's some actual problem they need to alert the company about. The presumption should be that that is not the case.
Well, Twitter internally does not seem to have treated that as a default presumption, given how many of those requests that they shut down. But I do think it's worth reiterating that the only reason we know about any of this is because of the Twitter files, which we don't have anymore, and which there's no evidence that Elon Musk is going to be transparent going forward with Twitter, or Mark Zuckerberg, or any of these other people. That being said, I think that perhaps the solution to this is that transparency. So it's not about saying the FBI can't say X, Y, and Z, but if the FBI knows that every single email that it sends has to be made public.
That's all. I mean, Schellenberger has said that as well, and yeah I think that would be good.
I'm sure that there are like security concerns about.
Well, it's probably like FOIA, it's a public records request type thing. There could be a more comprehensive FOIA type thing that allows for automatic or easier discoverability of these communications.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for us for today. Tomorrow on Rising, we'll have 2024 Democratic candidate Marianne Williamson on the show for a wide-ranging, lengthy interview. I'm looking forward to it. Bree's looking forward to it. We hope you're looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, you won't want to miss that one. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. So, in fact, you never miss any of this kind of content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.